And it was at that age poetry arrived in search of me. I don't know. I don't know where it came from winter or a river. I don't know how or when. No, they were not voices. They were not words, not silence, but from a street. It called me from the branches of night, abruptly from the others, among raging fires, or returning alone. There it was, without a face, and it touched me. I didn't know what to say. My mouth had no way with names. My eyes were blind. Something knocked in my soul, fever or forgotten wings, and I made my own way, deciphering that fire, and I wrote the first faint line, faint, without substance, pure nonsense, pure wisdom of someone who knows nothing. And suddenly I saw the heavens unfastened and open, planets palpitating plantations, the darkness perforated, riddled with arrows, fire and flowers, the overpowering night, the universe, and I, tiny being drunk with the great starry void, likeness, image of mystery, felt myself a pure part of the abyss. I wheeled with the stars, my heart broke loose with the wind. As much as I wish I'd written that poem, that is probably one of my all-time favorite poems by one of my all-time favorite poets, Pablo Neruda. The poem itself is just called Poetry. Well, the reason that I read that to you is because it has always inspired me. It has been a poem that I tried to write to for a long time, and what I mean by that is it was just this poem that I felt so much inside of me, and I wanted to write something that came from it, that was sprung from it, that was born from all that inspiration that I felt inside of me, all the inspiration that boiled up whenever I read that poem. Pablo Neruda is a Chilean poet, and I read a lot of his work in Chilean Spanish, which was hard because I speak Mexican Spanish, and so, they're not exactly the same. And I remember a long time ago, I actually tried to read some of that poetry to my grandma, and she thought it was ridiculous. She thought that the metaphors that he was making were very silly because they didn't make any sense. And it's always kind of stuck with me, this idea of the way that different people perceive poetry. And for me, that poem wasn't just about finding poetry for the first time, but about using it in the right ways, about how poetry can change you and can move you and can make you feel like you're part of a bigger, I don't know, a bigger universe, a more vast world. It just makes you feel like you belong to something, and that's what poetry's done for me for so long. And I know this is a stark contrast from the last video, this more bubbly attitude that I've got going. But it's necessary, I think, for me to show you the ways that we jump to and from, especially when dealing with our own mental illnesses, especially dealing with PTSD, which comes with this long slew of symptoms that often sort of drag every other mental illness into them. And it's not fun. But it's something you learn to live with, and one of the things that has given me so much joy and that makes me so happy and that helps me bounce back from those episodes is poetry, is reading and writing it. And so that day I might not have felt good, during the last video, but getting to read poetry, it helped. It helped to calm me. It helped to sharpen the direction that I wanted to move in. It helped me focus the emotions so that I could find something to do with them, so I could find a way to make them productive. So the reason that I read that poem, though, Poetry by Pablo Neruda, is because I wanted to read to you the poem that I wrote because I was inspired by that one. And it's one actually that I feel kind of embarrassed about. And honestly, I have not read it since the first time that I tried to read it at the Great Plains Poetry Pile-Up that happens here in Omaha, which is just a big reading competition. It's a poetry slam. But gosh, when I went that year, there was so many great poets. And I try not to do that as much anymore. I try not to just say, oh man, there was all these great poets there, and then feel like I am not a great poet, because I am. I'm not like the best, but I feel like I'm a good poet, and I feel like I need to hang on to that, and we all should, no matter what you do. If it's something that somebody could say you're an amateur at, why? You're doing it. I mean, you might be at an amateur level, but you are whatever that thing is. especially if you care about it enough, especially if you're passionate enough to do it every day. And then even if you don't do it every day, even if you have kids and you have to put it down for a while, even if you get depressed and for a couple of days you find yourself really struggling, maybe a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a year or two, you find yourself just not able to write, to read, to play, to film, to create, to exist. Give yourself time, but then come back to it. Don't leave it alone. Don't give up on those things that burn inside of you. They're important because they're important to you. So, Pablo Neruda wrote poetry, and so did I. That's what I called it. This poem poetry. Before, I kind of got staggered. I was scared because there was so many amazing poets that I looked up to when I was reading at that poetry slam. And I bombed hard. I wound up not reading that poem very well. Not the way that I would have read it. And I felt bad about it. So I think I want to redeem myself here. I want to read this poem to you and hopefully capture what inspired me to write it. Poetry. I keep watching poets out of the corner of my eye, afraid to face them fully. I keep watching artists fight a war through the fine shimmering film of the bubble separating us. I see them with the same eyes I read my Hulk comics. I want to be the strongest one there is. I've been so fucking scared too, though. Terrified of the power that comes with my responsibility, I keep whispering into the TV, hoping that all my best friends will encourage me to get off the bed. All the people I look up to sit in that bubble, making dreams come true no matter what fear sits before them. That's what poetry was to me. The sword that could slay the great beast inside of me, the shield that gave me the courage to face myself. At some point, though, I realized I didn't want to slay myself anymore. It was the world that needed to be conquered. I look out at the voices screaming proud and fiery, passionate for every single corner of their being. I want poetry to take me there again. I want to read the world like Braille, feel the intricate moments of space between the ballet of the falling snowflake and the chaos of all the dead ones melting into the dirt. It's in poetry that I can feel the heartbeat woven between atoms and quarks. It's in poetry that I've been reinvented again and again, turned from monster to dynamo to experiment to extravagant. It's in poetry that I love. I saw poets and artists unsheathing pens and paintbrushes, breathing fire onto the foul creatures crawling from the darkest recesses of our past. But they became overwhelmed and tired. And as their power dwindled and their spirits weakened, I sat and cried for fear that we had lost the battle, for fear that our worlds and our art had finally gone. But then, inside me, I felt magma churning. The open wounds of doubt and fear that festered on my body glowed like pus-filled cysts. They grew and burst. Molten liquid flowing from my sores, it burned me. Charred the fear from my flesh and pushed the sadness from my tears as they went up in steam. I wasn't scared when I looked in the reflection of that bubble, and I saw the lava peeling the flesh from my bones because I felt no pain. Because as the meat and the fat that I trapped myself in began to melt to my feet, I saw my bones glowing with a power I'd forgotten. I opened my mouth as fire dripped through the cracks in my teeth, and with one word the bubble popped. And the artists, I could hear them so clearly. I could see them with my own eyes. I could feel the way they sing, kissing my exposed nerves and my singed flesh. I was baptized in poetry and brimstone, so I want to thank you. All of you who write and perform, those of you grinding your passions and dreams into reality, I remember what it's like to feel that burning inside of me again. No more watching from the sidelines. I'm back in the fight.